So I thought I'd have a little chat today about something I read in the Old Testament. It was in Genesis. What drew me to Genesis? I mean, I was brought up in the Catholic faith. I'm interested in all the different faiths. But what drew me to the Torah, we'll just get this clear, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. It's also called the Mosaic texts. It's got a few different names. It's called the Old Testament. So it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the first 5 books. The reason I was drew to the Torah was because I read, when I did a little bit of study on the Torah, in fact I was reading the Bible, I read the Old Testament, and somebody mentioned the Torah, and I thought, what's the Torah? I was interested, I was intrigued, and someone said the Torah is the blueprint to the universe. And I thought, well, that sounds good, I'm into that, I'll have a look at that. So I went and started to study the Torah and started to look at the stories. And of course, you know, the same as all the Bibles, there's lots of parables, there's lots of metaphors, you know, there's lots of, you know, stories to illustrate other things. There's also a subtext, and I know there are things, glaring things there that push people away, you know, like people will say, for instance, one of the things people will say is, well, in the Bible it says that the earth was created in 7 days, and people just think it's a ridiculous statement. So I can't read a book like that because it's full of ridiculous statements. But I'm interested in, I'm not really looking to prove or disprove anything in the Bible. I'm not interested in trying to find fault with the different books. You know, when I read the Mahabharata, I didn't see it as a book of war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. I've seen it as a book that really just talked about the battle between good and evil, and about how the fact that they can't really exist in the same body at the same time. So it's a beautiful parable about developing virtue. And you could look at it and say it's horrific, it's got beheadings on every other page, but for me it wasn't about killing people. For me it was about these people were representations of influences and conditioning. So I'm interested in looking at that. I'm not really, there are obviously other people whose job it is to go out and they feel the need to do that. It's not where I want to be. I want to look at what the subtext is. One of the interpretations, this is just one interpretation which I found very exciting, was from Swedenborg, and his interpretation of the 7 days of creation was not that it was the earth that was developed in 7 days. It was the fact that it represented the 7 stages of man's development. Stage 1 being a selfish, self-serving clod, just looking out for himself, fearful, working from a scarcity mentality, to level 7, developing through all the different stages up to level 7, where man works purely to serve God, or man works purely to serve love, or man works purely from a frequency of love. If you get rid of the terminology, if you take away the word God and just look at the word love, and if you get rid of that and just think of it as a high frequency, so the 7 stages, the 7 days of creation can represent, and they represent to me, the 7 stages of man's development from selfishness to pure selflessness. And it's saying at the level of selflessness, when we selflessly serve other people, everything we want, the abundance that's out there will come to us. Everything we want, material and not material, internal and external, in here and out there, it will all come to us. But we have to cultivate ourselves till we get to that level of selfless service. So when I'm looking at the Bible, or when I'm looking at any of them, I'm not really looking specifically at the stories, and I'm not, I'm just looking at what the subtext is saying and what it says to me when I read it. For instance, when I read I had the Old Testament, which is about 90 hours. I had it on tape and I listened to it. And one of the interesting things I found was that just listening to the rhythm of the words as they are spoken on tape, just listening to them, or just saying the words, if you say them yourself and read it out loud, it's even more prominent, has a vibratory effect on you. It has a vibratory effect on your body, and you feel bliss just listening. You don't have to understand the words, you don't have to understand the stories, just the rhythm of the writing. It's a very, very beautiful writing, but the rhythm of the writing on its own is it's worth listening to it just for the rhythm. And I know in Islam and in Hinduism and in Buddhism, they like to chant a lot of their verses. They like to have their verses almost like a song because of the vibratory effect it has. We are obviously a vibrating massive energy, and this vibration can really affect us. So just for that alone, it's worth it. But I'm really interested in what the stories are saying. And one of my favourite stories is the story of Abraham and Lot. They go to the promised land, and the promised land would represent the frequency of love. And Lot is the nephew of Abraham. But when they get to the promised land, Abraham realises that the two of these people can't exist in the same place, because Abraham is very negative and hateful. He doesn't see God in anything. In other words, he doesn't see potential in anything. Whereas Abraham is an optimist, and he sees God in everything. He sees potential everywhere. So Abraham realizes this, and he says to Lot, you can choose whatever land you want, and I'll take what's left. Basically, that's the basic story. And obviously, if you read it yourself, you'll get a better interpretation. So Lot, being the kind of person he is, chooses the best land. He chooses the most fertile land up by Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham ends up with a barren piece of ground. What Abraham does over the next period of time, and what Lot does, is really telling. And again, if you're struggling with the terminology of Abraham and Lot and biblical, just think of Abraham as love, and think of Lot as hate. So if you just think of them as different frequencies at different ends of the spectrum. So Abraham is working from a frequency of love, and Lot is working from a frequency of lack. Abraham goes off, and he's got all this great land, he's got all this opportunity, but he basically over a period of time destroys it. In fact, eventually Sodom and Gomorrah is razed to the ground, and Lot ends up living in a cave, and his daughters seduce him because they're so afraid of the world they can't go out. They're so afraid of the world they end up living in a cave. They end up living in this very dark place. And his daughters are so afraid that they won't ever have children that they seduce their father when he's drunk, and have children through him. And I see that in my life a lot. I see a lot of people who are so afraid that they allow their world to shrink to the point where they're living in a cave. Even if they're surrounded by opulence, they're still mentally, physiologically, psychologically, spiritually living in a cave. I watched it with my own brother, who I absolutely loved. He was my hero. But I watched my brother through a series of unfortunate events that knocked him down, that allowed fear to shrink his world to the point where my brother became an alcoholic, and he was afraid to leave his own kitchen. His universe became one dark, shitty kitchen. And when we went to finally see him, because he wouldn't let us come round, we wouldn't anybody come and see him. When we finally went to see him, he was 2 days away from death. Fear had shrunk him to that point. And then in hospital, I watched my brother's life completely disappear. When he died, I watched his life completely explode. That's because he was working from that mentality of fear and lack, because circumstances had done that to him. And yet he was surrounded by so much opportunity. He got 4 beautiful children, he got a family that loved him. So this is what happens with Lot. Abraham, on the other hand, is married to Sarah. Sarah's can't have children. He got barren land. And yet he accesses love, he accesses his higher self, he talks to God, and God promises him progeny, promises him children, he promises him leadership of nations, he promises him riches. So Abraham starts to try and cultivate the barren land. He starts to try and have children with his wife Sarah. He tries to find this place of leadership. And the good thing about Abraham, what I like about Abraham, is that it wasn't just given to him. He just didn't get it. He didn't just get it. He had to cultivate it. He had to cultivate his pure imagination. So every time he would go back to God, or in his meditation, he would say, so where's this progeny? Where are these children you promised me? Where are these riches? Where's the fertile ground? Where's the leadership of nations? I don't see that. So he went through his own trials. He had to dissolve all his own beliefs. And the message from God was, you have to cultivate this. You have to work on this. You have to see it. And he said, listen, even my wife's laughing at me. My wife is 80. My wife will not be having children. Sarah would say to him, you know, you're listening to these messages and you're being told that, you know, you've been told that you're going to have children and that you're going to have riches, but I don't see it, and I'm not going to have children because I'm 80. And God, the message from God, or the interpretation was, cultivate it. We have to cultivate that feeling of love. We have to expand that feeling of love in our breast until, you know, all we see is potential. Till all we do when we look around is we see potential, because it's there. There's a massive amount of potential. Eventually, Abraham's wife Sarah did have a child over the age of 80, which is one of the miracles they talk about in the Bible. The analogy is really just, it's not whether she did or not. The analogy is saying, if you can hit the frequency of love, and if you can see potentiality in everything, there's nothing that's not possible. He became a leader of nations, he became a rich merchant, but not without massive amount of work. One of the things Anthony Robbins talks about is massive work ethic. Go out there and do the work. Make sure you do the work. But do it from a place of love. Cultivate it from a place of love. Follow your bliss. So the story of Abraham and Lot is lost to most people because they won't pick up a Bible, even though you can get the Bible online free. They won't pick it up. And they won't pick it up because they're filled with ideas of what the dogma and, you know, what people say about religion. But I think I've said this before on one of the podcasts, but I heard a great story from my friend Liam once, when he first had an epiphany and he first had this moment of clarity where he felt this love and he saw Jesus, but he had massive conflicts with the Roman Catholic Church. So he went to his local priest and he said to his priest, I've felt this feeling, I've had this feeling of God, this feeling of love, but I can't get it out of my head, you know, what's going on in the church and all the things I see in the church that I don't like and all the hypocrisy. And the priest said to him, he said, I'll tell you what I think. He said, I think that in Rome, they don't give too much of a fuck about me. And I don't give too much of a fuck about them. He said, I just look after my own relationship with God. In other words, there will always be someone to tilt a lance at. There will always be someone where we think that can't be right because they're doing it wrong. We don't need to worry about that. We don't need to start a campaign. We don't need to crusade. We just need to work on ourselves. That's the exciting thing that I found. We just need to keep working on ourselves, keep working on ourselves, keep working on ourselves. It's about us. It's about me. It's about you, working on you. No need to worry about the stuff out there. It doesn't matter that other people are doing it all wrong and people are messing up. It's about you coming back to your own game and thinking, am I working from a place of love? Am I cultivating that in my life? Am I cultivating my potential? You know, or am I allowing fear and doubt and negativity to stop me? And am I feeding fear and doubt and negativity with what I intake every single day? So there's massive potential, and that's what I love about the book. So it's good to look at the books. You know, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita is just about the prince of the world, Arjuna, going into battle to win back his kingdom. He's just trying to kill the influences that are stopping him from accessing love. And he falls into fear. And he feels terrified and he wants to run away, he wants to hide, he wants to go into the forest and beg for food. And Lord Krishna, who is the Godhead, just basically delivers the Bhagavad Gita, a spiritual discourse, and realigns him and said, oh, you've just fallen out of that frequency of love. Let me bring you back to that frequency of love. In this frequency of love, nothing is impossible. In this frequency of love, all of those things below will dissolve, but you have to work at keeping that frequency. You can't harbour a Lot and an Abraham in the same place. They have to separate. So if you're feeding yourself all day long with negativity from the news and from the newspapers and trying to cultivate love, they're going to neutralise each other. So it's like that old story, two dogs fighting in my head, a black dog and a white dog. The white dog always wins because he's the only one I feed. So just feed the one that you want, feed the place you want to be, and don't fall into that place of negativity and doubt, because no matter how justified you might feel when you attack or when you hate or when you feel vitriol or when you feel anger or righteous indignation, no matter how much justification you feel with that, you are still in a frequency of love. You're still in a sedimental place. You can't get rid of black by adding black. We need to lift ourselves up. And when we lift ourselves up to this frequency of love, By cultivating that, by working on it every single day, by feeding it every single day, all that other stuff below us will dissolve and we'll just see massive potentiality. Then we become a light for other people. Then we become a good teacher to our children. Then we become a good teacher to our friends and family. Then we become a good example to society. This is one of the things that Krishna says to Arjuna, because Arjuna's like, he's adamant, I can't do this, I'm not doing this, I'm too scared, I'm too afraid. And it's inspiring to see that even the prince of the world can be afraid. But when he says to him, I'm too afraid, Krishna says to him, you are the prince of the world. People are looking to you for an example. Your dharma is to go into battle, dissolve these influences and access your kingdom. People are watching. If you're the prince of the world and you fall into fear, what do? You give everybody permission to fall into fear. You give everybody permission to run away and hide. You give everybody a permission to shrink. You have a responsibility to teach your children, to teach your friends, to teach your family. You have a responsibility to follow your dharma, your purpose, and do the things you need to do. And if you're afraid, bring yourself back to that center and reconnect to that frequency. There will always be someone trying to pull you out of frequency by what they say and what they do. You've just got to keep lifting yourself up. And I'm not underestimating how difficult this is. I know it's difficult. It's difficult for all of us. But listen to this. Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane was on his knees and saying to God, take this cup off me. If it's your will, I'll do it, but this is the day before the crucifixion, take this cup off me. He was terrified. When Muhammad had the message from Gabriel in the mountains of Saudi Arabia, and he was told that he was going to be given the Quran, Muhammad was afraid. He ran down the mountain and hid, asked his wife to hide him. He had to cultivate courage, the same as Christ had to cultivate courage. Krishna was exactly the same. Arjuna was exactly the same. He was terrified, he wanted to run away. The Buddha, before the Buddha's enlightenment, he was visited by every demon and every demigod and every difficulty. It all flashed before his mind. You know, even the people that we admire, our heroes, people like Gandhi, you know, were afraid, but they cultivated love to dissolve fear. So it's not that you're not going to feel it, and it's not that you should beat yourself up if you do feel it. It's just the fact that we need to keep realigning. We need to recognize that we can't feed, we can't feed negativity and try and expand love. We need to cleanse ourselves completely. We need to stop feeding the negativity and the hate. We need to cleanse that from our life, and then we need to start cultivating the good stuff, the love. And it is difficult, but it's obvious, it's right in front of us. But you know, like I said, I've always said to people before, if it wasn't difficult, everybody would be doing it. You know, so just keep remembering that is part of the path. There's no growth in comfort, and love needs to be cultivated. We need to dissolve the lot, we need to expand the Abraham, and we need to believe there's potential in anything, there's potential in everything.